Hi, today is October 9th, 2020, which is John Lennon's 80th birthday. And so, in celebration of his birthday, I wanted to do a video on his final album, Double Fantasy, which was released in November of 1980. Very unfortunately, only a short while before John Lennon was murdered. So, he really didn't get to appreciate. Uh, People's reception to the album. I mean, he only had a month from the time it was released to the time of his death, very unfortunately, to kind of absorb public reaction, to kind of appreciate the album himself, I think, after it hit the store shelves. But I wanted to kind of cover the album itself, what I have in terms of the Double Fantasy album, and just go, I don't know, it's going to be a very informal kind of a video, but I just want to talk about the album itself a little bit as well. This is my vinyl copy of the album. It is still in the shrink. Although there's not a hype sticker. I don't know if there was a hype sticker, but this one doesn't have one. And it's just got the lyrics very plainly. There aren't any other photographs here. It's just sort of very stark. And it is on the Geffen record label. This was the first single that was released off Double Fantasy. I believe it was also released in November of 1980. This would have been the last single that was released during John's lifetime. And then this second single was released, I believe it was January of 1981, so shortly after his death. And each of these singles has a Yoko song on the B-side. B-side of this one is Beautiful Boys. And on this one, I believe it is Kiss, Kiss, Kiss. And then the final single that was released from Double Fantasy was Watching the Wheels. And this has Yes, I'm Your Angel on the B-side. This was the original Geffen cassette of Double Fantasy. And just some credits there on the inlay card. And then this was a Capitol release after Capitol kind of took over the rights to his catalog. It's a clear cassette, so I believe this was issued in the 1990s. And it's also got the lyrics in here, which is nice. And then CD. This was the original CD release of Double Fantasy. It's got the reversed cropped photograph on the back. The CD was not issued by Geffen. The CD was issued on Capitol Records. And this booklet has the lyrics on the inside. And then as part of the Lennon box set, this was the reissue. And this photograph that is in the gatefold is actually the photograph that was used for this interview album that was released, I believe, in 1981. It was on Polygram Records. But this is excerpts from, I think, John's Playboy interview. It's just John kind of talking about his life, his history with the Beatles, the making of Double Fantasy, kind of his inspiration behind that. So it's kind of a nice artifact to have. And there's a little card in here. It's there it is. And it is just kind of a breakdown of the different sections of the interview. And then there's a little, I think these notes are from Yoko. But anyway, it's just kind of, I digress from talking about the album just to show that record a little bit, that picture that appeared on the gatefold in that reissued CD. And this is what the disc looked like. It's actually, if you recognize that, that's the photograph from the back of the Milk and Honey album. But the photo session obviously was from the session that yielded the cover photograph and back photograph for Double Fantasy. And then the last thing that I have to show on CD is the Double Fantasy stripped down version, which basically takes the Double Fantasy track, strips away the backing vocals and some of the more polished aspects of the recordings. It almost sounds kind of like Plastic Ono Band in terms of just the stripped down nature of the songs. This cover drawing was done by Sean Ono Lennon, as well as the back drawing. And this contains both the stripped down version and the regular version of Double Fantasy. This is actually the cover of the Nobody Told Me single, although Yoko's been kind of cropped out of it, as you see there. Yeah, if you put these two sides together, that was the photograph for the Nobody Told Me single. Right in here, that was the photograph that was used for the Watching the Wheels picture sleeve. And then that was a photograph from one of John and Yoko's final photo sessions. I'm not sure, I don't think that was the Annie Leibovitz one. And then there's a booklet that comes with it that has some photographs, essay, so all in all, it's a nice addition to John Lennon catalog. And why am I wearing a Dark Side of the Moon tee? I don't know. I really don't plan these videos around what I'm wearing, or I don't change to accommodate the video. So anyway, if you're wondering. So the album itself, and one of the most chilling pieces of vinyl that I've ever seen, there was a memorabilia artifact tour that went around the United States. I don't know if it went overseas or in Canada or not, but it was called Magical History Tour. And one of the items that they have was the actual album that John Lennon autographed for Mark David Chapman. Apparently it had been sitting in police evidence files in New York City. So just to see that up close, I remember it was in a glass box. So you couldn't touch it, you could just, you know, get up close to it. But really, just made your hair stand on end, just knowing, you know, the history behind that album, that was the actual album, the last album that John autographed. Was pretty chilling. A couple of books that I have related to Double Fantasy. This one is called Starting Over, The Making of John Lennon and Yoko Ono's Double Fantasy. This was written by Ken Sharp. And it's just a chronicling of not only the inception of Double Fantasy, but it's got interviews with all the studio musicians. It's really the story behind the making of Double Fantasy. And one of the things that they reproduce here, this is the very last photograph, or I'm sorry, very last autograph that John ever did. And this was for the receptionist at the Hit Factory. As John was leaving the studio to go home where he was assassinated, he actually autographed a piece of note paper for the receptionist. Her name was Rabia. And so that's the autograph right there, the last autograph that he ever signed. And then this just came out this year. This was John Lennon 1980, The Last Days in the Life by Kenneth Womack. And this covers the last year in John's life. And really at the beginning of the year, he was suffering from writer's block. He was just kind of sitting in the Dakota. I mean, he was raising Sean, but just sort of listening to music on the radio and feeling like he was out of touch with the pop scene, wishing he could get his muse back. And then one day he's riding in the car with his driver, and the Paul McCartney song Coming Up comes on the radio, and he hears that and is just so blown away by it, just loved the song, and it almost was that spark that he needed to start writing songs again and start doing demos and home recordings. So just an interesting story behind that, but it covers the entire year from December of 1979 through December of 1980. A real interesting book. I would check it out if you're a John Lennon fan, if you haven't already. So talking about the album Double Fantasy, and it's actually subtitled A Heart Play. And this was an album which is half John Lennon songs, half Yoko Ono. So you get a John song, then a Yoko song, then a John song. And I just wanted to talk about John's songs. I will say about Yoko songs, I remember when I was younger listening to this album, I would always skip over the Yoko stuff. I thought, why is this even on here? I almost made fun of it. But, you know, listening to it now later, some of the stuff, especially like a song like Kiss, 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 is really such a bold recording, especially for 1980. I mean, it's got new wave elements in it. It's just a very kind of cool contemporary recording, which was more daring than anything John put on here. And I'm not knocking any of John's stuff, obviously, but just a real contrast to John's music and the style that he used on this album. Hers were a little more edgy, I guess I would say. So anyway, just going to talk about John's tracks on here anyway. So track that leads off the album, of course, is Just Like Starting Over, and you get the little chimes, the three chimes, ding, 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 to start off the album, which is, you know, and John did this deliberately. The beginning of his first proper solo album was Plastic Ono Band, where you had the bells chiming, the like big, huge, ominous bells chime 3 times before the song Mother. And so he did that deliberately to kind of contrast, like, I'm in a different place now, I'm older, you know, I've been through all that, I've come out the other side, okay. But this is really, Just Like Starting Over is very much an homage to the songs that inspired him to get into rock and roll in the first place, like Elvis and Gene Vincent and Buddy Holly. And so it's got a very nostalgic feel to it. Even his voice is sung in kind of a, a Buddy Holly, Elvis kind of a inflection to it. But I really like it. People can say, well, it's lightweight, it's insubstantial, but, it's John like he's always done, just commenting on what's going on in his life right now, talking about his and Yoko's relationship. He had the Lost Weekend where they were separated and then they reconciled. And so it's sort of where John is in his life at this point. And almost trying to like rekindle that romance is what's behind the lyrics after his sojourn in LA. So it's a sweet little track, and it's John totally 100%. The next song, and for me, this is probably the least favorite John track on this album, Clean Up Time. Probably most people would agree. As a matter of fact, when they issued the John Lennon collection, which was the first greatest hits compilation after his death, every John song on Double Fantasy was included except for Clean Up Time. But it's not a bad song. It's almost kind of like the chimes at the beginning of Just Like Starting Over. There's the counterpart to Plastic Ono Band. You've got Cold Turkey, which was John writing in late 1969, early 1970, about struggling with addiction, trying to clean up from that. This is sort of a lighter take on that, Clean Up Time, after a decade of decadence and indulgence, whether it be narcotics or alcohol or whatever it may be, just kind of, rebounding from that, cleaning up. It's a new decade. John's now 40, so another starting over, if you will. And then I'm Losing You, which, if we want to talk about counterparts to John's past to some of these songs, I'm a Loser from the Beatles For Sale album, very much, as you would expect someone at that age. John was 24 at the time, to be, you're trying to find love, and then you think you found the love, and then they break your heart, and then you get burned, and you're like, that's never gonna happen to me again, which is sort of the theme of I'm a Loser. With I'm Losing You, now it's a 40-year-old, he's in a longer term relationship. There's a lot more at stake when you're losing somebody, rather than just kind of, that affair or the girlfriend that maybe you had when you were younger. And it's very much a cry of pain, and really John expressing his fear after the events of during and after the Lost Weekend, where he was afraid that he was losing Yoko, that Yoko was going to hold all of his infidelities and kind of all of his partying that went on in the early and mid 70s against him. So you can really, reading into the lyrics of that and listening to the song, it's very much, what John was going through at that time, and the fears that he was expressing and the insecurities, kind of like Jealous Guy also, where he was afraid that the things that he had done was going to really harm his relationship with Yoko. And then going on to the last song on the first side, Beautiful Boy, just a really remarkable track, one of the best tracks on the album, if not the best track for my money. You've got Good Night at the end of the White Album, which was a song that John wrote for his son Julian Lennon. And now you've got Beautiful Boy, which is also kind of a childlike, dedication to Sean Lennon, his son, who just turned 5 when the album was released. So just a real sweet beautiful lyrics, same as Goodnight, which was sweet and beautiful. So you really get a window into John's tender side. You know, he liked to play he was a tough guy, and, you know, he was, you know, real macho, hard-edged, could be in some of his lyrics. But, you know, especially on Double Fantasy, you really get to kind of peel back the layers and see who John really was, kind of a window into his soul, maybe, as it were. But just a really great track. And then the first track on side A is Watching the Wheels. And the piano melody, the last time John really wrote a solo track that was based around the piano, I believe, was Imagine. And you can almost see similarities between Watching the Wheels and Imagine. You know, especially if you listen to the intro. You know, the Imagine is doodin, 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 doodin. And with Watching the Wheels, it's doodin, 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 doodin. So I'm not a musician. I never had a keyboard, and I was a musician. I'd play it for you, but you're stuck with me humming it. But anyway, Watching the Wheels is really John's feelings. It was written right as he was coming out of his creative funk. He had finally gotten his muse back. He was starting writing songs, but there were a lot of people towards the late 70s that were really knocking John. You know, why are you in retirement? Why aren't you putting out more music? What's happening with John? You know, why isn't he out there like Paul McCartney or Mick Jagger or Bob Dylan, you know, putting out contemporary music? And this was John responding to that, saying, look, you know, I'm content just to kind of take life at an easy pace. I'm out of the rat race. You know, I'm not looking for how my single is doing in the charts. I'm not worried about how many albums do I owe to my record company. What are critics saying about my album? So it's just kind of answering that. The irony, of course, is that when this album came out, he was leaving behind that slower pace and getting back into record promotion and getting the album out there and doing interviews and tour, you know, possibly doing a tour in the upcoming year. So, but it's really just a snapshot of where John was at the time that he wrote that song. The next song is Woman. Again, if we're talking about counterparts in John's past, John had the song Girl from the album Rubber Soul, and now he's singing about Woman. And I don't think that was necessarily a coincidence. In fact, there are similarities, as John himself, if you listen to some of the studio outtakes that were recorded during the recording of Double Fantasy, he even talks as he's discussing the track with the studio musicians, you know, the real connection between woman and girl, where he sings girl, and then there's, you know, woman, or, you know, ooh, and then yeah, yeah. If you hear it, listen to the studio dialogue, he makes that connection between the parts of those songs as he's trying to get across the feel for that particular track. So I'm not a singer either, so I apologize for trying to get some of these points across. So Woman, and then the last John track on here is Dear Yoko. Of course, we had Oh Yoko from the Imagine album and Julia from the White Album. Even though Julia was titled after his mother, essentially it's a veiled message or song to Yoko. Ocean Child, that's the translation of Yoko's name in Japanese, but nonetheless, you know, it's a sweet tribute to Yoko, just like Oh Yoko was kind of a, you know, John saying how much Yoko means to him. Dear Yoko is kind of a more lighthearted take about where would he be if he didn't have Yoko, just how much, you know, she's really the other, you know, really how she compliments him, and just, you know, what a team they were, that they were, you know, such a partnership over the years. So that is Double Fantasy. Appreciate any comments you have. Happy birthday, John. It's really wild to think in 2 months he will be gone as long as he was on this earth. So just, his music has meant so much to me over the years. Beatles music has meant so much. And so I just wanted to take a opportunity on the anniversary of his 80th birthday, or I should say, his 80th birthday. I just wanted to take some time to talk about Double Fantasy. Thanks for watching.